Okay. Did you all have, so we've pulled up the Monitoring and Managing Ash website here. Do you have a presentation you wanted to give, or did you want to just go through the website, or I can start?
We have like a few slides, and when I say a few, I think it's like it actually includes, I think, the one that you're looking at right now. So we kind of extracted stuff from the website and elsewhere. So and it's also maybe a more up-to-date version of that chart. I'm not sure about that.
We love up to date.
Oh, great.
Can you share your screen and see if that? Okay, great.
Sure. We're working on that. But
Okay.
if you have anything you want to say first, that's fine. You can do that while we figure out how to do what we're doing here.
Okay, great. We can see your screen, so it seems like it's working so far.
Yeah.
Oh, you're seeing our screen?
We
Yes.
are.
All right. Wow, great. Hopefully nothing embarrassing on it. Good. Okay, so should we just start right in?
I'd say go for it.
Okay, and my understanding is that Kathleen was also presenting, so I was wondering if Kathleen should present first, since a lot of our stuff is derived ultimately from stuff that she and her colleagues pioneered a while ago.
Well, I'd say she's here and can just chime in when she.
Okay.
Yeah, or
sounds
if you
good.
want a quick overview when they're done, you could give a quick overview of your work. Okay.
Just do them there.
Sounds great. Okay, thank you. So I don't know if we're in a hotel right now with not a great internet connection, and we don't know if like introductions were done of everyone or not. We'll just introduce ourselves. I'm Jonathan Rosenthal. Sitting next to me here, I don't know if you can see her, hopefully you can, at some point, is Radka Wildova, and we developed the Monitoring and Managing Ash program, acronym MAMA, back in 2017 in really close consultation with Kathleen and with Jennifer Cook, trying to build on what they had done for lingering ash detection and breeding and make it into a broad, readily accessible program that could be used across large geographic extents and involve natural resource professionals and community scientists. So that was our goal, and here we go. So it's a program of ERI, and I should mention ERI is the Ecological Research Institute, with which we are both affiliated. And it's a program of ERI that enables detection of lingering ash, henceforth abbreviated in many places as LA, through something which is not advancing here. Well, I'm doing that. So, let me try a different thing. I don't even have page down. This is weird. And my thing seems to be seizing up. This is not a good thing that's happening. All right, we'll check here. All right, I have to use the wheel. Okay. Data collection by natural resource professionals and community scientists, and encouraging management that facilitates lingering ash detection. And I'll mention that we went into this kind of naively, as scientists, thinking we just have to get all this great data and we'll find the trees. But we discovered along the way that there are management practices that facilitate lingering ash detection, and such as leaving enough living ash on the landscape that some of them can ultimately manifest as lingering trees. And there are practices such as going out and cutting all your ash proactively before EAB even shows up that precludes lingering ash detection. So we now, probably about 50% of our role in this is doing science, and 50% of it is really working with managers and trying to influence management decision making and strategizing and developing guidelines and dealing with the psychological obstacles that are out there, which is for everyone, if you're a manager or not, that once a place reaches really high levels of EAB-induced mortality, people tend to just get to the stage of resignation and giving up and saying, there's nothing we can do. These have gone the way of the passenger pigeon, when it's those places that have the really high mortality are the places where you can find the lingering ash. So you have to overcome that kind of obstacle to participation of resignation and get people motivated to get out and go into these high mortality areas, and realizing that there is hope and there are things that they can do. So it's now kind of a components of the data collection and influencing management and action. And I have to, apparently it's not responding to the keys. So here, Meg, is the chart that you wanted to highlight at the beginning. And this is tasks for each stage of EAB infestation. And it shows that there's some stuff that you can do and should do, as data collector or as a manager, pre-infestation before EAB even shows up, all the way to late infestation. And so there are, for example, establishing and using mama mortality plots, which are these standardized plots to document mortality levels, and that triggers, when certain mortality levels are reached, triggers the search for lingering ash in that vicinity, not just within the plots themselves, but more broadly, or rapid ash mortality assessments, which are kind of a stripped down version of mortality monitoring plots. These don't require multi-year commitments. They don't require tagging trees. They're things that citizen scientists can even do on publicly accessible lands, which for a monitoring plot, because you're tagging trees, you would have to get permission to tag the trees and so forth, and that can be very burdensome. And so we have these different steps that can be taken. The RAMAs you're only doing in areas where there's already some mortality already documented. And then as we shift to the right end of this chart, you see, again, recording, reporting, and protecting potential lingering ash. And what we're referring to here by protecting, we mean protecting from cutting. We've encountered lingering ash being cut because people were not aware they were identified as lingering ash. Luckily, those lingering ash were cut after we had already collected scion from them, but it's also happened, I believe, in some cases prior to that. And so finding, marking, and protecting lingering ash, reporting to us for possible scion collection. We don't collect scion from all the lingering ash that are reported, but we prioritize them using particular criteria, and possibly collect their seed. And also recently we've been discussing with Jennifer Cook, possibly at some point collecting pollen. So even male trees have something to offer if you're doing sexual propagation. So potentially pollen can be then incorporated into a breeding program. So far, so here are our numbers for validating lingering ash we found via the MAMA program, and a total of 186 validated lingering ash that are white ash, 16 that we really don't know if they're white or green, and those are trees that are typically in closed canopy forests, and their lowest branches are quite high up, so we can't be looking at the papillae on the leaf surface, 60, on leaves that are 60 feet up or whatnot. Of course, especially as is being reinforced today, some of the white ash in quotes that we're looking at may well be green ash or some other cryptic species. We're reasonably sure that these are white, but we're probably not 100% of these IDs are correct. The same thing for green ash, 41 validated, 23 validated black ash, and so for a total of 266, of which we've collected scion from 106, and the collected scion has gone to Cornell University for a breeding program established there. And also this year, some are also going to another partner propagation facility, also in New York, known as Land Stewards. And the vast majority of these trees are from New York, and a few of them are from Connecticut. I just want to briefly mention what we mean by validated. It means that either the people who are reporting these trees have supplied enough documentation that enables us to be sure that the species is correct, that they're actually most fundamentally white, and they're not, most fundamentally ash, and they're not reporting lingering hickory or lingering box elder or what have you, and that the trees are of sufficient diameter, that they're clearly lingering trees and not ingrowth, and also that the mortality in that area is high enough that the trees have truly been tested such that these remaining healthy, mature trees are in fact lingering trees and not trees that have that are still in good shape because they have not been tested long enough by enough EAB. So we have had lots more trees reported, but sometimes they turn out to be the wrong species, or they turn out not to be large enough, or the mortality level isn't high enough or whatnot. So we're just focusing here on the validated trees. And moving on, again, if this will advance. So our criteria for lingering ash, and this is based again on Kathleen and Jennifer and their colleagues' work, is we chemically untreated native naturally occurring trees that were mature at least 4 inches DBH during peak EAB invasion and stayed healthy at least 2 years after EAB killed at least 95% of the nearby ash. And so it's usually when these trees are reported, we then have to figure out kind of retrospectively, was this tree, at least 4 inches DBH, was this tree, would it have been of sufficient interest to EAB at peak infestation period that it would have been tested enough by them? And so in trees that are like directly adjacent or in a monitoring plot, that's fairly easy. The further you are, the less certainty you have of when that peak infestation level, that peak mortality was reached, the more cautious we get in terms of needing larger and larger diameter trees, to make sure that they're not post-peak ingrowth, that they're, and so we'll look at all sorts of other information, including information from site managers or even looking at tree rings and so forth to make sure that these trees were truly large enough at the time of peak infestation. And to find lingering ash, crucially, you need to look at the right places at the right times, because you have to look at those places where EAB has been long enough to thoroughly test the trees. So if you look in an area before the mortality threshold has been reached, that will yield spurious lingering ash trees that were not yet attacked enough by EAB to really test their resistance. And waiting too long, on the other hand, means lost opportunities, because trees will likely die from EAB eventually, because resistance is usually only partial, or other causes, such as people with chainsaws and itchy trigger fingers, or lightning or windstorms or what have you. And also, crucially, if you wait too long, you can have ingrowth confused with lingering ash, where trees that were present as seeds or as seedlings or very young trees at the time of EAB invasion, peak invasion, have then grown up and look like large trees, but they actually were never not tested enough. So you really want to get in after that threshold is reached without waiting too long. So how do we enable this? We've created what we call MAMA action maps, which help identify where and when to search for lingering ash. So these are initially created based on EAB detection history. We got a lot of information from state and federal detection history databases, and then we use standard mortality trajectories and spread rates to model where and when the 95% mortality will be reached. Of course, not everything obeys the model, and there are likely environmental and other historic influences, such that in some places we've seen the mortality gets really high really fast in areas apparently where trees are highly stressed due to other factors, and other places where where stands will take a longer time than typical to reach high mortality levels. So we refine and update them using MAMA's ongoing data collected on ash health and mortality. And so these show areas should be ready to be searched for lingering ash. And they also show areas that need more data and which MAMA projects to use to collect the needed data. So here's an example of a MAMA action map for the entire Northeast, or I should say for, I guess, the tree species in peril area that, that's handled, because we're now largely funded by Tree Species in Peril and work very closely in partnership with our Tree Species in Peril partners and so forth. We also work with a much larger network of our MAMA partners, but this map just shows New York and New England, because that's the prime Tree Species in Peril action area. And this map is old, so it's out of date, but I just want to demonstrate here that we have these areas these red zones. So these areas are areas that are known to be long infested or by EAB, such that the mortality levels should be really high. And if you find healthy trees there, those should be lingering ash. And you can see lots of numbers superimposed on these. So these are either MAMA monitoring plots or mortality levels, or MAMA rapid ash mortality assessment mortality levels. And so you see those are areas to look for lingering ash. And then if we go out from them, areas that should already have mortality and where it makes sense to do RAMAs, these rapid mortality assessments, to see how high the mortality levels are, and if high enough to look for lingering ash. And then we have areas from which EAB has never officially been reported. And even that's even true, for instance, here in much of New York. And we find that when we encourage people to go out and look for EAB, often these areas have actually EAB, and in some cases even actually have mortality, but state agency resources are no longer prioritized at delineating EAB infestation. So there's lots of areas that EAB probably is already at, but has not been documented. So we encourage people to do these basic data collection to even report that. And then once EAB is reported from a location, then we start those mortality trajectories running. So just a few more slides here. So we have multiple different projects. So we have Mama Ash EAB surveys, which are and go to areas where EAB has not yet been reported, but that have ash trees, of course, and see if you can find any EAB evidence. Then we have the Mama Monitoring Plots Network, monitoring 40 untreated mature ash annually until they're all dead. And you can start this after, EAB has already even caused some mortality. It's nice. It's, of course, best to document the onset of infestation, but that's not always possible. And these monitoring plots, I'll mention here, were based on a monitoring plot that Kathleen and her colleagues used, which I believe was circular plots. And we tweaked this a bit to make it more accessible to more people to use, so that as long as the plots cover enough area, they can be multiple variable shapes and so forth. And we've done kind of tweaking of protocols to make them no less rigorous, but still accessible to, the wide range of land managers and community scientists to use. And I'll just add one thing here, going back up to the monitoring plots. So the data determines the timing of the lingering ash search of the nearby area, but it also informs the plot holder about what's going on with their ash. And we found that there's quite a wide range in these mortality trajectories, and sometimes they go quickly, sometimes they go quite slowly, and sometimes things will plateau, in fact, at like 50% mortality, which may hint at kind of a higher population level of resistance. But this can better inform the management that the managers are undertaking, that it's not necessarily all your trees are going to be dead within 5 or 6 years. I mentioned the Mama Ramas, which are less precise, but provide comparable data to the monitoring plots network, and these can really be done by anybody, anywhere that they can access enough ash. Again, 40 mature ash to collect data, but it's not a multi-year commitment, and you don't have to tag individual trees. And then kind of the culmination of all of these is the Mama Lingering Ash Search, which is reporting lingering ash from high mortality areas. And so the Mama data collection projects are all on the Anecdata citizen science platform. Anecdata is a platform for very, very rigorous citizen science. All of the NASA citizen science projects, such as detecting a killer asteroid that's going to destroy all life on Earth, those are done on the Anecdata platform because it supports statistical analyses and relational data, and it's very highly rigorous. And so we have all of those on there. There are also printable forms also available, and also some data, Mama data, particularly for 2 projects, Mama Ash EAB surveys and Mama Lingering Ash Search are also supported and integrated into the TreeSnap platform, which is terrific because it reaches kind of a very different audience and a huge audience of community scientists. The Anecdata users tend to be more rigorous, and I'd say they each have their strengths. The TreeSnap really brings in a lot of people who just want to do something to help trees, and so people have been reporting lingering ash on TreeSnap. We've gotten a lot of those reports. We know that some of them are quite good. Some of them maybe not so. We haven't really. We're still in the process of going through those. Anecdata, we found that virtually all the reports we've gotten of lingering ash on Anecdata have all been great reports, because I think it's a particular audience that we reach through that who really want to engage in something really rigorous and are willing to put that time in to collecting a lot of very detailed data. And also two of these projects. I don't remember which ones. Do you remember which ones? I think the Ramas and the ASH EAB surveys are also on the are integrated into the Ecosystem Investigation Network, which is a project of the Gulf of Maine Research Institute in collaboration with the Ash Protection Collaboration across Wabanaki. So we have these different streams of platforms that provide us data, and also people can email us their data. Some people even send handwritten data sheets, data by snail mail. And we want this to be inclusive. We have, particularly for private landowners who have monitoring plots on their land, a huge percentage of them are retirees and not necessarily that tech savvy or that tech enthusiastic. And if they're going to take the time to set up a monitoring plot and send us all their data, handwritten or typed out or whatnot, we'll take it because it's really valuable data. And I think that looks like that's it. So we seem to be at the end. So it's not responding to the key. So I'm happy to take questions now, or Kathleen, if you want to go, and then however you want to handle things.
Wanted to give a brief, I feel like the lingering ash term, and I think I saw a chat question about lingering ash, and Jonathan gave a nice definition of lingering ash, but it took me a while to understand why lingering ash is so important and why it's hard to find. So I'll kind of contrast it. We were in Sweden for an IUFOR meeting last year, and with ash dieback, their approach is plant 1,000 ash, 90%, I think it was like 90 to 94% will die. You'll be left with 40 to 50 trees that you can then breed from and create resistant ash for ash dieback. That is not going to work for emerald ash borer. And Kelly Oden can tell you all about that. She had a planting of 32,000 ash from the 90s. 18 are left that are healthy. So there is real, like the lingering ash have something special. They have this like genetic resistance, but they're pretty rare. It's going to take us going out and finding them. And we call them lingering because they may not survive forever. They may only last 10 years or 15 years. So they're lasting a lot longer than their companions, but they're not bulletproof. So what we do is then we can get those, we can propagate them, we can put them into breeding programs, we can stack that resistance. Mary's going to talk about this. It's heritable, it's stackable, we can get progeny that are even more resistant than the parents. And then we have seed orchards, and then we have restoration. And if we get enough lingering ash that capture all of the genetic diversity on the landscape, that means we can save all of these beautiful species. We don't even know who they are yet, but if we're capturing those lingering ash, that's going to be where that resistance, and we don't have to bring in genetics from Asia. We can keep the species that are purely adapted to our niches and our environments. So that's kind of like the whole, I just wanted to give like the 50,000-foot view of like why we care about lingering ash and how that ties into the breeding program and how all that works. And then Kathleen, do you want to come talk?
Or
She can correct everything I just got wrong.
that was perfect. Yeah.
Beautiful overview.
I realize that like we've been talking about this for so long. We think everybody knows how it works, but probably most people don't. I would say
I just have like 2 minutes. So I did not prepare any slides for this. Sorry, I did not understand that I was supposed to do something for this part. But I did want to just highlight what Jonathan was saying about the timing of looking for lingering ash. That's really important. So what we see in our long-term monitoring plots is when emerald ash borer comes into a site, at first mortality is really slow, then mortality picks up, and around the time you have 50% mortality, there are trees, they're not all dying at the same time. You have trees that are dead, you have trees that have various stages of dieback, and you have trees that are healthy. And it's really easy to get excited about those healthy trees at that point in the process because they look different. But that's kind of just the typical trajectory of EAB. So those trees that are kind of healthy at that midpoint are likely to die within the next 2 years. So we really want to wait kind of 4 years after you hit that 50% mortality point, or 2 years after you hit 95% mortality, to really say, if a tree is healthy at that point and it's a large tree that was large at that peak of the infestation, then it's truly special. Then it's something that has survived through that whole time course of emerald ash borer. And really getting out there and looking at that point is important because, as Jonathan mentioned, you get ingrowth. So emerald ash borer is kind of the opposite of ash dieback. Ash dieback in Europe impacts primarily smaller size classes of ash. Emerald ash borer is primarily larger size classes of ash. So what we're left with after emerald ash borer comes through are lots of small trees that now have wonderful gaps in the canopy, right? And so they can rapidly grow up and become larger trees. So then it gets really confusing to see if these trees that survived, did it really survive the peak of EAB as a large tree, or was it small at the time and therefore not of interest to EAB? And now the EAB population is much lower and it's still persisting. So you kind of have these different cohorts out on the landscape. And looking at the right time for these lingering ash to screen and test for resistance is really key. I think I had one other point, but I forget it at this point. So that was the main thing, Jonathan. That was great.
Yeah, questions here, or if somebody wants to read from the chat.
I'll just say thank you,
I had a
Kathleen.
question.
About before we move on, the
Gary's got one comment.
diameters was initially kind of a proxy for trying to make sure that trees were like in the canopy. So that's the other way to kind of think about it, is to make sure the tree was experiencing peak EAB. Was it really like in the canopy of that stand when EAB was coming through? And I mean, that kind of excludes suppressed trees, but they're suppressed, so they're probably not making it in. We haven't had any luck with when we took a couple early and they just didn't do well. So, yeah.
Thank you. We'll go back to somebody online was asking a question.
I had a question. Thank you for giving this talk. This has been really, really interesting. My question was just more on, in the reporting form, it says that if a tree's been quote unquote planted, that it's ineligible for reporting. And using that Sweden argument or example of how, like, you plant 50,000 trees and maybe 50 or 100 survive, I would, under that reporting mechanism, I just wonder if those trees also would be eligible. In my city, we have about 120, maybe more if you include the National Park Service, trees that have been, to our knowledge, been untreated, and they survived the purge, so to speak. And EAB got to us around 2008. So we haven't planted any ashes since then, but we still take care of about 120. I was just wondering, should those be reported, not reported? They're just, a lot of those trees were the sole tree left on the block. Everything else was an ash and everything else died except for that specific one. So I was just kind of curious there.
Yeah, I think Jonathan pointed out that tree snap is a bit more of a global, we take all comers. I think that's a great place to report those trees. And I don't think anybody believes that that is necessarily not a true source of resistance. I think there's two concerns. First, that they may have been treated, because sometimes it's hard to know, or there may have been some urban effect with EAB, and I know less about that. Teresa may have some more comment on that. But second, I think we're just focused on genetic diversity and knowing the provenance of the tree, and if it carries local genetics was an important part of the conservation thinking. So if it's something that's been planted, we just don't necessarily know that much about, is it summit? Are we just saving summit over and over? Or is it another cultivar? Or is it truly representative of the local genetics? So I think that becomes a conservation question. But generally, yeah, I would say still report it because they may be of interest. I think different groups who maybe collect scion and propagate these and conserve them will have different goals. And so if that's, great urban street trees survived, maybe that becomes a goal that we do want to have that at some point. And yeah. Jonathan may have comments on that too.
Yeah, I would mention that we, as part of our definition, we have naturally occurring and native. So, the planted trees would certainly not be naturally occurring, and they may not be native, for all we know. They may be, Manchuriana or something like that. But we will take these reports. We don't destroy anything, but we would never, unless some imperative comes along, I don't think we would ever prioritize those trees for scion collection because of those ifs that come with trees having been planted. But we would certainly accept those reports in case they illuminate something later on.
I just said the exception would probably be a well provenance planting if you know where the seed came from originally, because that tells us it's not just where it's from per se, it's where would the progeny be adapted climatically.
Right. Which is going to be a big deal for restoration, to put things back where they're adapted or pre-adapted and going to be successful.
Okay, and we have some limited information that I can always research on our end through our inventory. Some of the stuff is quite old, but cool. Excellent.
Yeah, absolutely. Great.
I was just going to chime in really quickly and say too that at least tree snap, but I'm pretty sure Anecdata as well, there's sufficient room for nuancing your reports within these platforms. And so the more information that you can provide about these trees or potential seed sources, potential areas that it could have come from, if you know any of that information, that's all great and helpful. Because every so often, people do look through these reports and read these kinds of comments. And so just throwing that out there, more information is really awesome. And so some of these trees could still be helpful.
Absolutely. Use that comment box.
Yeah, we read everything eventually.
It's true.
Other questions? Julia?
I just had a general pondering question. As we think about the southeastern states and how to do lingering ash work in the southeastern states, two general questions come to mind. Number one, how fast is EAB actually spreading in the southeast? It's unclear to me. We really have a good handle on the rate of spread. Apparently, it's not very abundant here in the Charlotte, Chapel Hill area. Is that true? And it's coming. Is it slowing down? Do we have more time? And unfortunately, in the southeast is famous for its lack of community-based collaboration. New England, of course, will be a much more organized area, I'm sure. All those Yankees have got their act together up there. The question is, can we do it down here? Do we have enough time? And I'm wondering this afternoon, I'm talking a little bit about seed collection, but related, perhaps it's reasonable to think about a general fieldwork effort across the southeastern USA, doing just basic collection of material for DNA, but also looking for lingering at the same time. Can we actually organize a collaborative event doing 2 or 3 things at once? Is that crazy?
I don't think it's crazy. I would love to, we would love to be involved in that. And one thing that we're actually been working on is coupling seed collection with lingering ash detection, especially for black ash, because they're fairly scarce in our region to begin with, and obviously lingering trees even more so. And so there are focused efforts on black ash seed collection, and what we realize is that that same pool of people who know where the black ash are, who are interested in doing something for conservation, and who want to learn more. Those same people who are interested in seed collection and qualified for that would also be ideal folks to be going out and looking for lingering trees. Right now, lingering trees, as we've discussed, you really want to only look in those high mortality areas. But even in that case, if you get folks going broadly across the landscape, finding those stands, again, this is hopefully analogous to what you have in the Southeast, obviously not black ash, but knowing where those stands are, fanning out across them, doing seed collection, that those people then have that knowledge of where the trees are and are also noticing where the high mortality areas are or are impending, and can also be used to find the lingering trees there. So I think that these 2 different approaches can be layered on top of each other and have a certain amount of synergy. Plus, where we've found lingering seed bearing black ash, we've also collected seed. So, you know, they can, in that case, really complement each other.
And Kelly, comment on the southern.
Okay, yeah. So this is Kelly Oaten with NC State University, but I was with the North Carolina Forest Service for 8 years before then, and we did a lot of the ash surveys. And I will say, like, I was on the forefront of tracking it across North Carolina, and we, hindsight, looked at how quickly it was being detected. It is the fastest spreading invasive species we have in recent history in the state. There was a thought that when it got down to the south that the scattered or more scattered distribution of ash might slow it down. That didn't seem to be the case. I think it looks like we're not detecting it because we're not looking for it anymore. Like when we first found it, we were setting 50 traps in every county, and now we don't set any. And so I think it's more of a reflection of it being reporting based and not like actual state cooperators going out and doing formal surveys. So yeah, it's spreading and it didn't seem to slow down based on the lower concentration of ash that we have.
Yeah, Zane did a lot of collecting in the Smokies, and that was the same thing. We saw that the trees that they were treating looked great, but everything else, like, that was patchy, but it was, I mean, lots of devastation. Even though it was only, and they told us it was only 2% of the trees in the Smokies are ash, so it's not as densely packed, but we still saw just like massive.
Yeah, that's our statewide FIA number. I don't know about the Smokies.
So it doesn't seem slow to us.
This is Zane again before I pass it off to Kathleen here, but just a comment. In the Southeast in particular, even though we have less ash overall, it doesn't mean that it's not locally abundant. So we have areas that have really, really high concentrations of ash. We just have less of them. And so I think sometimes that gets conflated with 2% of the canopy cover means not that much.
Yeah.
But when it's like rare mountain alluvial forests, turns out that matters a lot if you care about preserving local ecology.
So if I just want to just quickly jump in about using FIA data, that it probably depends on where you are and where we're focused in the Northeast, where it has, I'll put it, topographically interesting terrain, where we actually have mountains and so forth. We have a real kind of patchwork mosaic, even within a county or within counties, of areas that have very high mortality levels and have long been infested, and areas that have not even been infested yet. So we tend to use, like when we're looking for that 95% threshold to determine lingering ash searches, we do it more locally than the county level, because if we're using FIA or other data that are averaged across a county, we may never reach that 95% mortality level, because you'd have areas that are high mortality and areas that have no infestation yet. Averaged together. It may be different, I don't know, in the Midwest or something, or areas where it's a broader invasion front, you know, on flatter terrain. But we have these like isolated valleys and so forth that have very different statuses in terms of EAB invasion.
So I had two thoughts. The first one is with spread and severity in the south versus further north. When we get quite far north, like into Minnesota, Wisconsin, the Northeast, we're seeing more of the larva taking 2 years to develop. As in Ohio, we're probably 75% 1 year development, 25% 2 year development. As you get further south, it's all going to be 1 year development because you have such a nice long growing season. So you may expect, even faster spread, faster mortality, just because they can complete that life cycle faster, unfortunately. The other thought that I wanted to share is that we do see species differences in susceptibility to EAB and the prevalence of survivor lingering ash in different species. So as Jonathan showed, we have less black ash, lingering ash that we've been able to find. Also, very few or no pumpkin ash that we've been able to find. We're finding, green and white ash survivors, and then blue ash is less preferred by EAB. We see a lot of large, very large survivor blue ash, although we do also see some that are killed by EAB. So at the moment, our criteria for lingering ash is kind of a one size fits all, 10 centimeters DBH and larger. But I'll tell you that I would be really excited to find a 6 centimeter DBH surviving black ash. And meanwhile, with blue ash, you know, a 6 centimeter surviving blue ash would not excite me terribly much. So as we go forward, I expect these and collect more data on these species. I expect to have different criteria, slightly different criteria for different ones. You know, as we get the word out to the public, it's easiest to just have, you know, a one size fits all. But when we're actually selecting these for resistance testing, we're kind of thinking in a nuanced way about the different species.
And I'll add that for our action maps, they come across as this one size fits all. Originally, we were using the mortality trajectories provided by Kathleen, which were, I think, largely driven by green ash. We're finding that the mortality overall seems to be proceeding a little more slowly in the Northeast, and that may be because we're the vast majority of trees we're looking at are white ash. But then you also have the black ash there. So what we do is create that one size fits all map, but then we have instructions on interpretation that are, you know, especially for black ash, it's more accelerated mortality trajectories and so forth. So, you know, don't be held back by this. You know, you can be in an area that has black ash where it's already a really high mortality threshold and high mortality has been reached and so forth. So, you know, believe what your eyes are telling you. If you're in an area with a given species and given environment and so forth that has really high mortality, you know, go for it, you know, as long as you can document that mortality for us. And then there are, you know, areas that maybe we've projected to be really high mortality and for whatever reason aren't. Those can be really interesting. Again, maybe it's something where on the population level you have a higher level of resistance or something else is going on. Maybe the you know, the detection data is wrong or what have you. But anyway, so those are just meant as kind of standardized one size fits all guides to where to look. But as Kathleen mentioned, you know, we're also finding the same thing, like a much more nuanced understanding of variation in mortality trajectories.
Just one more thing, and maybe Kathleen can speak about this a little bit more intelligently, or someone else can. But as far as I'm aware of currently in the literature, there's also, so I think most of us are plant people, right? That's the direction or the perspective that most of us are coming from when it comes to ash. But you also have this really significant component of animal behavior from emerald ash borer itself, which to my knowledge, and maybe I'm wrong, is not particularly well understood across its entire invasive range. There are some people who are doing some wonderful work, like Therese Poland, Kathleen, and the U.S. Forest Service. But it seems to me like there's a large gap, particularly in the Southeast and moving over into the Western United States, about understanding what's actually happening with emerald ash borer itself. I think there's a gap where we could really use some more entomology focused partners to help us answer some of these questions. So maybe just a plug for everyone here and online. If you have any entomology friends, please
recruit them for each. Yeah. Yeah, and like Mary was saying, there's ways for us to phenotype ash that are tractable, like putting eggs and looking at larval kill once they've hatched. But like a lot of the behavior stuff is just, we can't phenotype it. We don't look at it. We have no idea what it's, we're not going to be able to measure the genetic basis of it because it's just a black box. So there's only certain ways we can kind of understand emerald ash borer, the resistance phenotype. So.
This is not a parthenogenic insect. This is an insect that is probably adapting to the North American landscape. And to my knowledge, we're ignoring. I'm not aware of anyone actually actively working on that. There were some studies early on to figure out how many introductions we had, and I think it was perceived to be limited, but it wasn't like, 2 insects. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know how much that impacts, but if we're not, I mean, it's a black box. Yeah, it's doing its thing too.
very successfully. All right, other questions? Anything in the chat? I think we got 1 minute before break. Now or never.
Well, not never. You can always ask.
Nope, now or come find us at the break. Yeah.
It says it's done.
Yeah.
Perfect. Perfect time for break. Yep.